You're watching The Narrative Nest. If you're drawn to tales that twist the mind, blur the line between truth and illusion, and leave you staring into the shadows long after the story ends, then you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now settle in and listen closely. Some voices are not meant to return. They say the forest of Windmore breathes after dark. Locals speak of a low hum, too human to be wind, too mournful to be animal, rising from the blackened pines like the whisper of a warning. Generations have passed these stories down, each adding a layer of dread, a new disappearance, a new reason never to go near after dusk. But none of those tales held weight. Not until the summer of 2024. That summer, in the town of Ellendale, a young sound technician named Clara Moresby uploaded a short clip to an online forum simply titled Male Voice, captured at 2:17 a.m., Windmore Ridge. The file was only 18 seconds long. It contained nothing more than the faint crackle of pine needles, a cicada's drone, and at the end, a man's voice, pleading, "Don't let him hear me." The voice was clear, desperate, and unmistakably real. Within 48 hours, the file had gone viral. Experts tried to trace the frequency range, modulations, anything. What none of them expected was what Clara revealed in a follow-up comment that same night. "My dad vanished here 18 years ago. This is his voice." The clip was verified, enhanced, isolated, matched, and it was true. The voice belonged to Lewis Moresby, missing since August 2006, last seen hiking alone into Windmore Forest. No body, no trace, just a cold case, faded missing posters, and a family that never found answers. Until now. This is where the story begins. July 12th, 2024 to 10:39 a.m. Clara Moresby stood in front of a camera she had mounted in her late father's old garage, which she had recently converted into a kind of studio. Behind her hung faded trail maps, red marker lines zigzagging through areas labeled Ridge 9, Old Quarries, and South Hollow. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were rimmed red, and her voice shook with something between disbelief and terror. "I wasn't trying to find anything. I was testing field gear for a documentary I'm working on, just wind readings. Bird calls, harmless. But I left the recorder overnight by the southern ridge. When I came back and listened to the audio." She trailed off, glancing to her right, as if expecting someone to appear. "You don't understand. My dad, he had this lisp, just slightly on the S sound. You can hear it. It's him." Comment sections exploded. View counts climbed past 3 million within days. Clara received thousands of messages from psychics, scientists, and strangers claiming they'd heard similar things. But the ones that haunted her came from a cluster of accounts that seemed coordinated. Each message was simple: "Don't return to Ridge 9. But Clara had already gone back, and this time she wasn't alone. She brought with her a cameraman named Rowan, a former journalism major with an interest in sound mapping and a not-so-secret crush on Clara. Their plan was to do a 3-night stay, camping near Ridge 9 with solar-charged equipment, trail cams, and directional microphones. They were documenting everything, but from the moment they arrived, things started going wrong. First came the sounds. That first night, somewhere around 2:23 a.m., they both woke to what sounded like someone walking around their tent. The steps were slow, measured, and then a low whisper, too faint to understand, except for one word: return. Rowan reached for the recorder. It had stopped working. Clara, terrified but obsessed, grabbed her father's old tape recorder, an ancient handheld relic he used during field work. It clicked, the red light blinked on, and she pressed record. The next morning, they found no footprints, but on the tape, static, then breath, then, "You weren't supposed to come." The voice was Lewis Moresby's again, but it was slower, distorted, like something was speaking through it. Clara played it on loop. Her hands trembled. Rowan wanted to leave. He didn't say it, not at first, but his eyes kept drifting toward the tree line. He had grown up in Ellendale. He knew the stories. His uncle used to tell him about the night whistler, a figure seen only from the corners of your eyes, always behind you, never ahead. A voice dash steal a dot. Clara didn't care. "This is my father," she kept saying. "We have to stay another night." That evening, something changed. Rowan went to check the outer motion sensor, just 50 feet from their camp, and didn't come back for almost 20 minutes. When he returned, he was pale. He couldn't speak. He simply handed Clara the memory card from the trail cam when they reviewed the footage. It showed Rowan standing before the sensor post, motionless, for 13 full minutes, his eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Then he slowly raised his hand and pointed toward the forest. But Rowan remembered none of it. He swore he had walked there, checked the sensor, then returned immediately. Clara zoomed in on the frame. Behind Rowan, deep in the shadows between two trees, there was a faint silhouette. A man, barefoot, dressed in hiking gear, staring forward, and in his hand an audio recorder, just like the one Lewis Moresby carried when he vanished. They left that morning, silent, broken, back in. Clara brought the audio files to someone she never thought she'd speak to again, Father Thorne, the man who once comforted her as a child the night her father was declared dead. Father Thorne had changed. His hair had thinned, his skin was paler, but the way he listened, intense, focused, reminded Clara of something. After playing him the voice, he said nothing for a long time. Then he walked to a small safe behind his bookshelf and pulled out a folder labeled Project Echo Restricted, 1995 to 2006. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside were dozens of pages, topographical maps, voice waveform printouts, incident logs. Clara flipped through, heart pounding. "What is this?" she asked. Father Thorne looked at her, eyes heavy. "Your father wasn't just hiking, Clara. He was part of something. A field study, YES. But not for birds or trees." He placed a photo in front of her. It showed Lewis, young, smiling, standing with two other men, both of whom Clara had never seen before. All three were holding satellite dishes and headphones. He was documenting the Winmore phenomenon, Thorne said. They believed the forest echoed frequencies that didn't belong to this world. Fragments of voices, sometimes entire sentences, things never recorded, never said. They thought they could map it, understand it, and did they, Clara? Whispered. Father Thorne's lips pressed together. They all vanished within 9 months. She stared at him. "All three," he continued. "Your father was the last. They all walked in, and none came back, until your recording." Clara leaned forward. "You knew. You let me grow up thinking he just wandered off. I was told not to interfere. We all were. Project Echo was shut down, the equipment buried, the files sealed. I kept a copy." She couldn't breathe. "I need to go back," she said. Thorne grabbed her wrist. "You won't come out a second time. That voice, it's not him anymore." But Clara had. already decided. If there was even a chance her father was still in there, if even a part of him had survived, she had to try. Rowan refused to return, so she went alone. On the night of July 19th, 2024, Clara entered Winmore Ridge with nothing but her father's recorder, the old project folder, and a body cam. She never returned. But 5 days later, a local ranger patrolling the area found the recorder. It was sitting on a stump, still warm from the sun. He pressed play. It was 13 minutes of static, then breath, then her voice. "Rowan, if you get this, please don't come looking. He's still here. But he's not alone. There are others, and they don't want to be found." There was a pause, and then the final words, clear and sharp. "He doesn't like being heard." The tape ends there, and every night since, hikers near Ridge 9 report the same thing. A woman's voice, echoing through the trees, calling someone's name. The forest didn't make sense anymore. 3 days after Clara vanished, Rowan sat alone on the edge of Windmore, the trees spread out like a black sea in front of him. The sunlight hit the treetops like it always did, but somehow everything beneath that canopy felt ... wrong, lopsided, too quiet. He hadn't slept since the night she went in. Her last message played over and over in his ears. He doesn't like being heard. It made no sense. And yet, everything about it felt like the end of something ancient and buried. Something that was never meant to be disturbed. Clara had trusted him. She had begged him to go back. But he couldn't. Not then, now. He didn't have a choice. At 4:17 p.m. that day, he walked into the police station with the folder Father Thorne had given Clara, Project Echo, and demanded they reopen the case of Lewis Moresby, the officer. On duty, Sergeant Colton Reyes took one look at the documents and laughed. "You think this is evidence?" he said, flipping through pages of waveform diagrams and hand-drawn maps. "You know how many people have disappeared in those woods since 1974? 37, and all we ever get are stories like this." Rowan grabbed the recorder from his bag, listened to her voice. Reyes stared at him, unimpressed. But when Rowan hit play, the smirk faded. "Rowan, if you get this, please don't come looking." The voice was clear, trembling, real. Then the whisper, "He's still here, but he's not alone." Sergeant Reyes leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Where did you say you found this?" "I didn't. A ranger did. I just got a copy from the station archive." Reyes rubbed his jaw. "You're saying this is recent? 5 days ago? That's Clara Moresby." Reyes leaned back. "We closed her missing persons file 2 days ago. Presumed dead." Rowan said nothing. Reyes tapped his fingers, then finally sighed. "All right, I'll bite. You're saying there's something in those woods, something that steals voices, that mimics them, but sometimes it lets the real ones through." Reyes didn't answer for a long time. Then he stood and walked over to a dusty file cabinet. He pulled out a locked drawer and retrieved a thick beige folder labeled 1977 Ridge 9 Recordings. "I wasn't supposed to ever open this," he muttered. "But the chief's on leave and, hell, I was on that search team in '94. I know what it felt like." He slid the folder across the table. Rowan opened it. Inside were dozens of taped interviews, photos of half-buried tents, audio cassette, logs with timestamps, like 4:44 a.m. male voice, presumed lost hiker, and 6:06 p.m. unintelligible whispering, layered frequency. but one file caught his eye. Case number 777E, Diana Caldwell. He opened it. March 12, 1998. Subject reports. Hearing her brother's voice, calling her name from Ridge 9. Brother confirmed deceased in 1996. Subject led authorities to Ridge 9 during snowstorm. Disappeared 36 hours later. Only trace recovered. Audio tape found nailed to tree. Tape contained 13 minutes of wind, then one whisper, "He likes you better." Rowan looked up. Reyes nodded slowly. We called it a suicide. But that phrase, it never left my head. He likes you better. Rowan closed the folder. I'm going back in. Reyes didn't stop him, just slid over a flashlight and a flare. If you don't make it out, I didn't send you. That night, Rowan packed 2 body cams, Clara's original field gear, and a backup recorder. He returned to Ridge 9, alone, reaching the same spot they had camped before. The trees loomed tall, windless, like sentries guarding a secret. He didn't light a fire, didn't speak, just sat and waited. At 2:12 a.m., the recorder clicked on by itself. Rowan's blood went cold. The red light blinked, then stopped, then blinked twice, slowly, rhythmically. Then he heard footsteps, soft, bare, approaching from the north. He raised the camera, heart hammering, and hit record. Nothing, no one, but the footsteps kept coming, circling him, invisible. Then, a whisper, right behind him. You waited too long. He spun. No one. He checked the body cam. It was still recording, but on playback, the footsteps were gone. Only his breath, his heartbeat, but something was there, a low hum, like a tuning fork buried under static. Then the audio cut. He looked at the recorder. The battery had drained, despite being at 80% just 10 minutes earlier. And then the voice came, this time from the trees. Clara's with me. She remembers you. Rowan stood frozen, his mouth dry. He shouted, "Where is she?" Silence. Then, closer than you think, he ran toward the voice. Through underbrush and thorns, deeper into Ridge 9 than any sane person ever had. The forest closed in, thick, unnatural. The air smelled of iron and damp moss. Then he saw it, a clearing dot, and in the center, a wooden structure like a hut. Doors, no windows. Covered in moss and bark, he approached. Inside, darkness. Absolute. He held up the flare, struck it, and threw it inside. The interior lit up in a flash of red-orange glow, and on the wall, dozens of tape recorders. Old, new, cracked, dusty, all mounted like trophies. Each had a label: Diana, C-1998, Mark D-2003, Lewis, M 2006, Clara M 2024. Rowan's breath caught. Then the recorders clicked on. All at once, a cacophony of whispers, sobs, screams, and repeating messages erupted from them. Clara's voice, "Rowan, it's not me anymore, get out, get out." Lewis's voice, he uses the voice, he steals the voice. And one unfamiliar voice, calm, male. "You want her, bring a voice of your own." The recorders all went silent. Then one fell from the wall. It was new, still clean. It had Rowan's name on it. He stumbled back, then sprinted through the trees, through the blackness, out of the clearing, and behind him the forest roared to life. Branches cracked, leaves hissed. A sound like heavy breathing followed him, but he didn't stop. He ran until dawn, When he finally reached the edge of the forest, he collapsed onto the road, shaking. Later, when police found him, he had no tape, no evidence, but in his pocket was a recorder identical to Clara's. Only one thing was on it. A single sentence, spoken in Rowan's voice. "She's still inside. I'll trade myself." He never remembered saying it, and that night, when he tried to destroy the tape, it didn't burn. When he tried to drown it, it floated, so he buried it in concrete. But some nights he swears he hears it playing, even from under the ground, a voice, his own, whispering back to him through the dark. It was the way the recorder wouldn't break that disturbed Rowan. That most heat tried everything. Fire, water, even smashing it with a hammer. It didn't scratch, didn't heat up, didn't crack. It just stayed, cold, silent, untouched, like something that didn't belong in this world, like something watching him. It had been 3 days since he escaped the forest. 3 days since he found that hut in Ridge 9, the one with the voices, the tapes, and Clara's name burned into one of them, and his. A clean recorder, labeled with his name before he had even spoken into it. He hadn't told anyone what he saw. Not the police, not the rangers, not even Father Thorne. Because how do you explain something that shouldn't exist? The concrete slab he poured over the recorder was still wet when the voice came again. It was just past midnight. Rowan lay on the floor of his apartment, staring at the ceiling, trying to pretend the world was still logical, when his phone buzzed. No number, no contact, just a voicemail. He played it. "You buried the wrong thing." His blood turned to ice. The voice was his own, but warped, slower, tired, and at the end, a faint echo. "She's waiting." Rowan sat up, heart pounding. The floor near the concrete slab was damp, not with water, but with a strange, black residue, thick and tar-like. It bubbled, shifted, and then, for a brief second, he heard it, the faint click of a recorder turning on, from beneath the concrete. That was when he knew. It would never let him go. He had to go back, but not alone this time. He drove 2 hours north, to a man who hadn't stepped foot in Ridge 9 for 30 years, Jacob Mercer, former cryptolinguist for the Department of Interior, now a recluse who lived off-grid in a cabin lined with rusted antennae and broken ham radios. He answered the door in a threadbare robe, clutching a radio set like a lifeline. "I knew someone would come," he said without surprise. "You heard it too?" Rowan asked. Mercer turned slowly. "I heard them, plural." He led Rowan inside. The cabin looked like a bunker. Dozens of cassette players were stacked on metal shelves, blinking lights, half-tuned frequencies, and signal meters littered every corner. A map of Ridge 9 was pinned on the wall, circles drawn in faded red ink. Project Echo wasn't about sound, Mercer said, pouring whiskey into a tin cup. It was about language, but not the kind you or I speak. Rowan raised an eyebrow. Then what were they recording? Not recording, translating. The frequencies that come out of Ridge 9 aren't environmental. They're structured, like coded speech. Rowan leaned in. "You mean, it's trying to talk to us?" "No, it's trying to learn how to talk to us." Mercer lowered his voice. "It steals voices to mimic ours. The more people it lures in, the better it gets. That's why the recordings keep happening, why the same words get repeated." Rowan's skin prickled. "Then what's in there now?" Mercer met his eyes, an echo, wearing the faces of the people it took. Rowan couldn't breathe for a second. "Clara's still alive." "I heard her," he said. Mercer nodded. You might have, but you need to ask, was that her or her voice? They sat in silence for a long time. Then Rowan whispered, "Can it be stopped?" Mercer took a long sip from his cup. "I tried. In 1995, we thought we could disrupt it. White noise, feedback loops, sound cages. We sent in a team." He gestured toward an old photograph pinned near the radio shelf. 3 men and a woman, dressed in black jackets, standing at the edge of a misty forest. Rowan recognized one of them. Lewis Morris Pamord. Mercer continued. Only 2 came back. One disappeared again a month later. The other never spoke again. Sat in a hospital, staring at a blank wall for 19 years until he died. What about the entity? We never found it. We only heard it. What did it say? Mercer looked away. Not yet. Rohan frowned. Not yet. Mercer said nothing, but his eyes told the rest of the story. It was waiting that night. They made a plan. Rowan would go back into Ridge 9, but this time with Mercer's equipment, frequency disruptors, subsonic mics, and a low-band scrambler known as the Mouth. Cage, a prototype helmet that generated a white noise field around the wearer's jaw, supposedly preventing any voice mimicry from taking root. You can record, but you can't speak while it's on, Mercer warned. And if I hear Clara, do not answer her. If you answer, it binds. Rowan nodded. He left at dawn. By noon, he reached the outer ridge and descended through the overgrowth, stepping back into the underworld that had nearly claimed him. The trees leaned in like dark figures, and every step he took echoed slightly off, like time was misaligned. He reached the clearing by nightfall. The hut was still there, but something had changed. The tape recorders were gone. The walls were bare. But on the floor, laid neatly in a circle, were mirrors, each cracked, each reflecting distorted angles of his face. And in the center, a voice recorder, Clara, single quotes. He stepped forward. The mouth cage buzzed faintly around his head, creating a low static field. He bent, picked up the recorder, and pressed play. The first few seconds were blank, then a crackle, then her voice, Rowan. "It's me, not the echo, me." He didn't respond. "I know you're scared, but I figured it out. It's not just copying, it's becoming. It takes pieces of you the more you speak. That's why you can't talk." A pause. "I didn't vanish, Rowan. I was swallowed." Then a new voice, not Clara's, slower, deeper, like someone playing a tape backward. "Say her name, Rowan. Say it, and we'll give her back." The mouth cage buzzed louder. Rowan's hands trembled. Then came another whisper, this time his own voice. "Say it, say it, say it." He ripped the helmet off. The silence hit him like a THUNDERCLAP, and for 1 second, just one, he saw her, standing across the clearing. Pale, thin, hair tangled, Clara Rowan. His heart shattered. She stepped forward, hand trembling. "It's really me." He opened his mouth, and then he saw it. Her shadow, it didn't move, didn't shift. It just stood, still, unconnected to her body, like paper taped to the ground. He froze. "Rowan, say something," she whispered, but her lips didn't move. Not once. That's when he knew the entity had learned enough. It didn't need recordings anymore. It could speak, now. He turned and ran, but the forest shifted. The trees closed in. The ground became slippery with mud and vines, and all around him. His own voice screamed, "Come back, she's dying. Come back, you promised." He tripped, fell. Something grabbed his ankle. Not hands, not roots, but something invisible. And then he heard it. From deep beneath the soil, a chorus, dozens, hundreds, all speaking, all him. Every word he'd ever said in that forest, now echoing back to him, and one final whisper, almost kind, "Thank you for the voice." Darkness swallowed him, and just before he lost consciousness, he saw above him, in the trees, something moving. Not human, not animal. Something between it opened its mouth, and from it came his own scream. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive. Rowan woke in Ellendale General, his body bruised, left arm fractured, and patches of skin along his calf burned as though from chemical exposure. He had been found just after dawn, collapsed on a back trail over 5 miles from Ridge 9. A hiker had spotted him lying face down in the mud, surrounded by pine needles and blood. But that wasn't what disturbed the hospital staff. What disturbed them was that Rowan hadn't spoken since he arrived. Not a word to nurses, not to doctors, not to police. And when they tried to feed him, he turned his head away, silent, eyes wide open, like a man afraid that even chewing might make a sound. He wasn't mute. His vocal cords were fine, but something had sealed his voice behind a wall of terror, something far older than language itself. They called it trauma-induced aphasia, but Mercer knew better. He arrived 3 days later, after bribing a janitor to get through security. He found Rowan in bed, a hospital bracelet wrapped around his left wrist, a bandage across his jaw, and his eyes staring blankly at the wall. Mercer didn't speak. He simply placed an envelope on the bedside table. Inside it was a cassette tape, and a note, "This is not the end." That night, Rowan sat up for the first time. The nurses said he didn't blink for over an hour. He didn't sleep, but he stared at the envelope like it was a wound he could feel in his chest. By morning, he was gone. Security footage showed him walking calmly out of the hospital, wearing a stolen EMT jacket and slipping through the east doors. No one stopped him, no one saw where he went, but Mercer knew. He watched the footage again and again, freezing it at the frame where Rowan turned to glance at the camera, eyes hollow, skin pale, and for a split second his mouth opened slightly, as if to say something, but no sound came, because he wasn't Rowan anymore, or at least, not all of him. He had brought something back, and it was learning. Meanwhile, 42 miles away, in a small cabin near Ketter's Lake, a woman named Ellie Dawson sat in her living room listening to static. Ellie was a ham radio operator, 61 years old, retired, with no close family. She spent her days reading true crime and scanning dead frequencies for odd transmissions. She'd always liked the way static sounded, like the forest, she said, alive and empty. But that night, she picked up something strange. Channel 14.6. A frequency long since abandoned. The static changed, became melodic, rhythmic, and then a voice cut through. "Eleanor, wake up." She froze. No one had called her Eleanor since her father, who had died in 1988. "Eleanor," the voice repeated, "we need you again." Then a clicking sound, like dozens of recorders being switched on at once, followed by this, "Clara is still inside." Ellie dropped the headset. That name, she hadn't heard it since Project Echo was dismantled, she thought. The forest had gone silent. She was wrong. The voices were back, clearer, louder, organized, and they were calling people by name. By morning, the story was everywhere. 3 campers found in Winmore, all mute. A news van from Channel 5 rolled into town. A headline looped across the screen as the reporter stood outside. The forest edge, authorities remained baffled after 3 teenagers were found wandering near Ridge 9, unable to speak and showing signs of acute psychological shock. All were found carrying identical tape recorders in their pockets, none of which appear to have been purchased or made recently. Forensic teams are investigating the devices, but no data has yet been recovered. The town of Allendale was in panic again. Curfews were quietly discussed. Forest access was restricted, but no formal lockdowns were issued. The sheriff's office released a statement calling it a strange coincidence of environmental exposure and trauma. But people knew better. Old families with long histories started leaving town, boarding up their homes, driving out quietly in the early hours. One man at the hardware store said his grandfather had always told him, when the voices start naming names, get out. Mercer tried to reach Clara's mother, but she had disappeared 2 days earlier. Her house was unlocked, a cup of tea still warm on the stove, and on the kitchen table, a photo of Clara as a child, with her mouth scratched out. That was when Mercer made the call to someone he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Her name was Dr. Isabel Holt, the last surviving researcher from Project Echo's early experiments. She picked up on the second ring. "I knew you'd call eventually," she said. Her voice was brittle but calm. "It's active again," Mercer said, "and it's spreading." She was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, "How many?" "3 confirmed. 1 in a coma, 1 missing, 1 changed." "Do you still have the original echo cage prototype?" Mercer glanced at the dusty crate in the corner of his workshop. "I do." "Then meet me where it started." She hung up. That night, under a moonless sky, Mercer drove to the abandoned outpost near Ridge 9, a rusted, half-collapsed bunker used in the original 1980s experiments. He hadn't been there in decades. The trees seemed tighter now, taller. Watching Isabel was already there. She looked older than he remembered, white hair, hunched shoulders, but her eyes were sharp. They opened the crate together. Inside was the echo cage, a spherical array of microphones and frequency dampeners designed to trap environmental voice patterns and loop them back at the source, confusing whatever was sending them. "It only worked once," Isabel said softly. "In '89, trapped something in there for 47 seconds. What happened?" "It started mimicking my father." Mercer said nothing. "Then my son, who was only 6 at the time. The thing inside shouldn't have known his voice." Mercer adjusted the cage. "Do you think it's grown stronger?" Isabel looked into the trees. "I think it's listening right now." They set up the device in the clearing, ran the wires, tuned the frequencies, and then they waited. Nothing happened for 2 hours. Then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., all 3 microphones began to glow red. The feedback loop activated, and from the cage came a single voice. "I remember you, Isabel." She stepped back. The voice was her husband's. Then another voice joined in. "Mercer, you brought him." And finally, Clara's voice. "I'm not inside anymore." Then, silence. The cage began to shake, then melt. The wires hissed and burst, and from the center of the field came the sound of breathing, heavy, wet, distorted. Mercer grabbed Isabel and they ran. They didn't look back. The cage was gone by. Morning, and in its place, a tree had grown overnight. Tall black bark, twisted limbs. At its base, a new tape recorder. They didn't retrieve it, But rangers found it 3 days later and turned it over to the sheriff. The tape was damaged, but one sentence remained, a whisper stretched over several seconds. You gave me voices. Now I want bodies. That day, Mercer left Ellendale for good. But Isabel didn't, single quotes. She had one final task. She returned to the original Project Echo facility, now an underground archive sealed off by the state, and broke in. She found the lost files, every map, every field report, and at the very bottom of the last drawer, Clara's original application form. It was dated 2 years before she was born. They called her name again at 2:09 a.m., Clara. But this time it wasn't coming from the trees. It was coming from inside her childhood home, the same one her mother had vanished from just a week ago. Neighbors saw the lights flicker that night. The house had been empty for years, boarded up, utilities long disconnected. But suddenly, the porch bulb blinked on. Then the kitchen window lit up in soft orange glow, like candlelight. A few claimed they heard a child laughing. One woman on Sycamore Lane swore she saw a shadow walk past the attic window, tall, thin, and moving backward. By dawn, the house was silent again, but the front door had been left open, and on the threshold lay a cassette tape. Not just any tape, Clara's very first field log, recorded when she was only 12. She'd been part of the experimental child subject group, known as Whisper Class, a hidden program within Project Echo. Children with heightened auditory sensitivity were trained to listen to ultra-low frequencies and map emotional resonances. Inside supposedly haunted locations, Clara had been their best Dr. Good. Her voice on that tape was soft, almost melodic. Day 14, the house hums at night. I don't think it sleeps. Then a pause. Sometimes it breathes. Mercer listened to that tape 10 times, and by the end he realized something chilling. The ambient sound behind Clara's voice. It wasn't static, it was whispering, layered, hundreds deep. Names, dates, coordinates, and underneath it all, the phrase, "They gave her to us." Mercer played it for Isabel. Her face went pale. She never told us she recorded that, Isabel whispered. She was only supposed to observe, not speak. They both knew what it meant. Clara had made contact long before the incident at Ridge 9, and she'd hidden it. The question was, why? They returned to the house the next night. This time, they didn't bring equipment. They brought matches. We burn it, Isabel said. We end the resonance. But Mercer hesitated, because something was waiting in the house. He could feel. It got the smell of ash and dirt, like wet soil dug up too soon. The floorboards creaked softly, in patterns, not random, almost like breathing, or counting. Inside the living room, the wallpaper was peeled off in long curls, revealing a wall covered in writing. Tens of thousands of names, all scrawled in pencil, all children in the center, circled 3 times. Clara Dawson, but below it, another name had appeared, freshly written, still smudged. Rowan Mercer. His son, Mercer, staggered back. He hadn't spoken that name aloud in 15 years. Not since the drowning, not since the day the lake took him. How the hell does it know his name? Isabel whispered. Then she noticed something else. The writing, it wasn't random. It spiraled, inward names, forming a vortex. And in the very center, where Clara's name once was now a blank spot, an empty space, as if something had been erased. I think they're reorganizing, Isabel said. Rewriting the memory of the original subjects, and Clara. She may not exist anymore, not in a way we understand. Suddenly they heard a click from upstairs, like an old tape being pushed into a recorder. Then footsteps, slow, dragging, coming from the attic. Mercer drew the revolver he'd started carrying again. But Isabel shook her head. "No use," she said. "It doesn't kill things that were never alive." The attic door was ajar. Beyond it, pitch black. They climbed the stairs. In silence, the air got colder with each step. Halfway up, they both stopped, because a familiar sound was drifting down from above, a lullaby, one Mercer hadn't heard since. Rowan was 3 years old. Isabel froze. "You hear that too?" she whispered. He nodded, and then the voice joined it. "Daddy, open the door." Mercer collapsed. The air left his lungs like he'd been punched. Isabel caught him, shaking her head. "No, it's not him, it's the signal." But Mercer wasn't sure anymore, because deep down, something in that voice was real, raw, and that's how they knew the system was breaking. The entities, whatever they were, had begun hijacking personal memories, not just voices. They were no longer mimicking the living. They were inhabiting the dead, or at least the memory of them. Isabel lit a flare and hurled it into the attic. The room burst in blue smoke. For a moment, they saw nothing, then a figure in the far corner, not moving, not breathing, just watching. It was Rowan, or what remained of him. His eyes were hollow, his jaw hung slack, but around his neck hung the original Whisper Class badge. He stepped forward, and the wood groaned under his feet. Then he spoke, except his mouth didn't move. The walls spoke. "I remember drowning," they said, "but I didn't die. I drifted, and they caught me." The attic began to spin. The walls folded inward. Mercer pulled Isabel out just in time. The door slammed shut behind them. They ran, coughing through smoke and heat. The floor buckled, cracked, and collapsed. They barely escaped before the entire structure crumbled inward like a sinkhole swallowing itself by the time fire crews arrived. The house was gone, not burned, just gone, nothing but a circular pit in the dirt. Lined with black ash, the news reported it as a gas line collapse. No one believed it. The next morning, 3 more children in town stopped speaking. All of them had drawings on their bedroom walls. Spirals, names, numbers. One of them, a boy named Daniel, wrote something on his chalkboard before falling silent. I heard Clara inside the mirror. That night, Isabel made her final recording. She locked herself in her basement archive and turned on every analog device she owned. Audio cassettes, VHS, old reel-to-reel. She wanted to send one last message to whoever finds this. Shut it down. Burn it all. Do not let the resonance spread beyond Ellendale. Her voice cracked. They don't want voices anymore. They want vessels. They're trying to come through. She looked off camera for a moment. Her eyes widened, then click. The tape ended. She was never seen again. 3 days later, in a church outside town, a priest discovered a box in his confessional. Inside were 42 tapes, all labeled with the same phrase, Project Echo, Phase 2. He listened to one, just one. By morning he'd gone blind. The sheriff found him kneeling in the woods, hands folded in prayer, whispering Clara's name over and over again. The tapes were not supposed to leave. Ellendale, that was the condition set in 1987 when Project Echo was terminated. Burn the archives, seal the tunnels, and salt the soil above Ridge 9. The last command in the declassified document was handwritten. In red ink, what was recorded here must not echo outward, but it had, and by the time anyone noticed, it was already too late. It began with Father Kellum, the priest who found the tapes. He was taken into custody after being discovered in the woods, blind and bleeding from the ears, still whispering Clara's name. At first, they thought he was suffering from a stroke, but the MRI scans showed no trauma, no bleeding. His brain activity, however, was unusual. gamma waves, those associated with memory recall and intense focus, were firing in rapid succession, mimicking the pattern of someone reliving a memory over and over again on a loop. The neurologist wrote a single word in his report, meaning his brain had been synchronized, locked by an external rhythmic frequency. It was Isabel's final fear realized. The tapes weren't just audio logs, they were transmission vessels, and something or someone had begun using them to override the minds of the living. Within a week, 3 more people in nearby towns were admitted to hospitals with identical symptoms: nosebleeds, loss of hearing, dissociative episodes, followed by prolonged whispering fits. All 3 had recently come into contact with antique shops that had unknowingly acquired boxes of old magnetic tapes from a storage unit sale in Ellendale, all labeled Echo Archive, 1984 to 1989. By the second week, local authorities requested federal involvement, but the agents who arrived were not from the FBI or Homeland Security. Their IDs bore no agency name, just an embossed circle with 9 smaller ones inside it, the same sigil etched onto the walls of Clara's childhood home. They referred to themselves as custodians of the listening order, and they didn't ask questions. They confiscated every analog device in a 10-mile radius. They traced every surviving Whisper class record back to its point of origin. Then they disappeared, but not before. Mercer saw them with his own eyes. He'd gone underground since the fire, hiding in the storm drains, rotating between abandoned fallout shelters and ranger outposts. He was gaunt, eyes sunken, sleep-deprived beyond human limits. But something had changed in him. He no longer feared the voices. He was following them, tracking their rhythm, listening not just for words, but for patterns in the pauses. He believed the silence between the whispers held coordinates, and he was right. Using a series of pitch-shifted audio files Isabel left behind, Mercer decoded an ancient auditory sequence, one that predated language. It mapped the resonance back to a place long buried beneath the forest. A structure older than any colonial settlement, one locals called the Hollow Church. No one had been able to find it in years, but on the 19th night, after heavy rain washed away a section of the forest floor, Mercer found the stone steps leading down. Carved into each one were names, the same names Clara had written on her wall, only now they were scratched out, every child erased as if their identities had been removed from time. He descended into blackness. No flashlight, just the hum of the earth, and then a voice, not from above, not behind, but within him. "You're late, Robert." He hadn't heard that voice in 15 years. His wife, Rowan's mother, gone since the lake swallowed her Dot, except now it wasn't just her voice, it was her memory. There, last night together, the fight, the scream, the splash, and then silence. She'd always haunted his dreams, but now she was inside his waking mind, replaying the moment over and over again, and whispering something new. "We never drowned. We were exchanged." He collapsed, his ears began to bleed. Something was rewriting his memories, threading new fabric into the core of his consciousness. When he woke, he was no longer in the tunnel. He was in a pew, inside what appeared to be an impossibly old church. No windows, no roof, just a black sky pressed against the stone walls, and Clara, standing at the altar. Not aged, not ghostly, just Clara as she looked when she vanished, 12 years old, smiling. Double quotes, "Do you remember now?" she asked softly. Mercer shook his head, tears running down his face. "I don't understand," she nodded. "I was the first," she said, "but not the last." She pointed to the altar. It wasn't an altar anymore. It was a table, laid out with cassette tapes, VHS reels, wax cylinders, phonographs. All forms of recorded sound, all arranged in a spiral, each humming softly, as if alive. "They speak in memories," Clara said, "because that's how they survive. They can't make their own. They borrow ours." Mercer stepped back. "What are they?" she smiled. "Old listeners, trapped between frequencies, waiting for voices to pull them through. And you." Clara's smile faded. "I let them in when I was a child. I thought I could help, but they used me to open the breach." She lifted her shirt slightly. In the center of her chest was a circular scar, 9 dots inside one larger. I was the first vessel. Suddenly the church shook. The walls began to bleed. Light, not bright, but wrong, like TV static soaked. In gold, the pews cracked. The ceiling crumbled. Clara looked at Mercer. "They're coming through. You have to choose." "Choose what?" "Burn the archive. Or join us." Then everything went white. When Mercer awoke again, he was lying in the middle of the burned-down house, empty, silent, except for a single tape player at his side. Inside, a fresh recording. He played it. It was Isabel's voice, but not from any previous tape. New. Recent. Her final message: "They let me go. For a price." Then static. Then Clara, whispering, "We never left. We just changed frequencies." The next day, strange reports began emerging from across the country. Families waking to find unfamiliar voices on baby monitors, analog clocks running backwards between 3:33 and 3:35 a.m., children drawing spiral patterns in sleep, and an entire class in North Dakota suddenly going mute during story time. Doctors couldn't explain it. Authorities denied a link, but Mercer knew the resonance was no longer local. It had spread through signals, through memory, through voice, through belief. Mercer carried the recorder like it was a wounded child, not just because of what it had revealed, but because of what it represented, a bridge between two realities. The tape inside hadn't just spoken Isabel's final message. It had rearranged the very air around him when it played, the way a tuning fork splits a still pond. He replayed it over and over that night. "They let me go. For a price." Each time, the background hum shifted ever so slightly, until it wasn't just static anymore. It was a signal, weak but deliberate, a frequency layered beneath her voice. And Mercer, exhausted and trembling, finally realized it wasn't the words she had left for him. It was the coordinates. He used spectral analysis software on Isabel's final recording, overlaying it with the pattern of Clara's childhood hums. The result was a harmonic match, which, when translated into a digital echo map, created a waveform that resembled a specific shape, a long arc, dipping and curving before rising again sharply. Not a sound wave, a terrain profile, and it matched only one known location in the state, a place abandoned since 1963, WZQR Channel 3. Signal Hill Broadcast Station, an experimental radio tower built during the Cold War to explore long-wave transmission through mineral-rich ground. It had collapsed after a lightning storm. At least that was the official story. No personnel were ever recovered. Mercer knew better. Now the lightning hadn't struck from the sky. It had burst out of the antenna. He arrived at Signal Hill by dusk the next evening. The road had long been reclaimed by roots and vines. The forest seemed to draw inward, toward the tower, as if every branch, every stone, every buried thing had leaned in to listen for something they once knew. The tower itself, though rusted and skeletal, still loomed like a bone claw against the darkening sky. But it was the building beneath it that mattered. The broadcast control center. The walls were lined with analog equipment, tape decks, signal monitors, tuning wheels, and dials with frequency markings that hadn't been used in decades. The air smelled like burnt ozone and decaying paper. Everything hummed, softly, as though the building itself was breathing. And in the center of the main room, untouched by dust, sat a tape labeled, "Origin Do Not Transmit." Mercer hesitated. He'd come this far chasing voices, but something about this moment felt final, like the edge of a cliff in a fog, where one more step didn't mean falling, but vanishing. He loaded the tape. The reels spun, and then child's voice, breathless, terrified. We made it too loud. They heard us back. Then silence. Then the voice again, older this time. Warped. They told us we were special, that the spiral would protect us. But the spiral wasn't for us. It was for them. It was a gate. And we opened it with our own names. Mercer froze. The voice was his, age 11. Recorded during a speech therapy session he barely remembered. His mother had taken him to a specialist because he kept whispering to himself at night, in a language she didn't recognize. The voice continued, double quotes, ... They said the church was built atop the mounts. The listening order tried to seal it, but the silence they used wasn't strong enough. Not with all the new voices echoing around the world. Phones, recorders, broadcasts, they made it louder, stronger. Now it's coming through everything. The tape word slowed. Then another voice, Clara, Clara, double quotes. No one remembers the first child anymore. Not even them, but she remembers. She sings every midnight. From the forest floor, then humming, faint, but undeniable. A lullaby, the same one Isabel had found on the whisper tape, and then it stopped. Not abruptly, but mid-note, like something had swallowed the rest of the sound. And then Mercer heard it. A voice behind him. No. Rewinds. He turned. The room was empty. He backed toward the exit, heart slamming in his chest. When the monitors all blinked on, every screen showed a different location. Not from this town, not even this country. A playground in Taiwan, a kitchen in Cairo, a hotel room in Norway, each with an audio bar at the bottom, flickering. Something was being transmitted simultaneously across the world, and in every single feed. Children were sitting still, mouths open, eyes glassy. Listening, he tried, shutting down the system, ripping cords, breaking dials, but the screens stayed on, and then a sound poured through the room. Not from the speakers, not from the tape, but from the air, like a radio station, bleeding through human bone, the same spiral drone from Ellendale. Mercer screamed as blood poured from his nose. He staggered from the building and collapsed at the base of the tower. That's where the Rangers found him, barely conscious, muttering something about the girl who never aged. He was taken to a private medical facility, but even now, when he sleeps, he hums the lullaby, and sometimes he laughs, but not like Mercer, like a child, one who's been alone in the dark for far too long. Across the country, incidents rise, kids sleep-talking in unison, old radios playing unheard broadcasts, voicemails, with no call history, and everywhere the spiral, drawn in condensation, scratched into wood, appearing in condensation on classroom windows. The listening order begins activating old safe houses, but they're too late. The origin broadcast has leaked, the hollow church has cracked, and the breach has widened. Only one place remains sealed, Clara's original cell, buried under 17 feet of concrete at the edge of the Ridge 9 containment zone. But something knocks there every night, 3 times, always at 3:33, and behind the knocks a voice whispers, "Who's next?" 3 days before the final breach, a storm rolled in from the east, not a natural one. There was no wind, no lightning, just sound. Low, pulsing like something massive shifting beneath the world's skin. They said birds flew in backward spirals, that trees wept sap without reason, that animals gathered in silence at the edge of the hollow church ruins, not panicked, but waiting. And in the center of it all, buried under the collapsed altar, Clara's cell remained sealed until 3:33 a.m. When the knocking stopped and the spiral on the door began to rotate, no one saw it move. It just was. 1 moment still, the next slightly turned, and the steel reinforcements bolted and bricked over began to whine. Not crack. Whine. Like they were singing something back. Dr. Mercer, sedated and restrained at St. Bartholomew's Institute, sat bolt upright in his sleep, eyes open, smiling. He began humming the same 3 notes from the lullaby. Then, with both wrists bound, he pressed his thumbs against the padded wall in a slow circle, and whispered, "She remembers." Far beneath the earth, in a listening station the government denied funding, a man named Josiah Kane received a call on a frequency no phone could use. There was no number, just a tone, 3 pulses, then a child's voice. "You failed her." Josiah dropped the phone, ran. But the shadows inside the station followed, not behind him, ahead, as if they were guiding him toward something he had buried 34 years ago, under oath, under silence, under a false name. Subject 0, Clara Elwood. But Clara was no longer a subject. She was the host. When they sealed her inside the church as well, under the foundation, they believed they were protecting the world from her voice. But her voice had never been the threat. Her ears, where she was the first to hear the whispers, not interpret, not transmit here. And it drove her mad, until she answered. That's when the spiral opened. Not just a pattern, a code. The listening order thought they'd created it as protection, but Clara had only ever drawn it after she heard it in her head. The spiral wasn't theirs. It was a map, a frequency lattice, not of sound, of attention. Each time someone studied it, tried to understand, they tuned themselves closer to the source, like leaning over a well and hearing your own echo, only to realize the echo is 1 second ahead of you, predicting your words, leading you deeper. The final tape was found inside an unmarked metal box in Mercer's personal effects. No label, just the number 8. It contained a conversation between Mercer and a woman, unidentified, but the voice was familiar to those who'd followed the broadcasts. It was Isabel, or something wearing her voice. Tape begins, Isabel, you're not supposed to remember. Mercer, remember what? Isabel, the first broadcast. You were there, in the church. The night they sealed her in. You were just a boy, but you listened. Mercer, no, I was in Ellendale. I was Isabel. No, you were born under the church. You were part of it, Mercer. That's not true. Isabel, why do you think the voices found you? You carry the echo, Jonathan. You always have. Mercer, then, what happens now? Isabel, the broadcast has already begun, but the signal isn't what you thought. Mercer, what? Is it, Isabel? A doorbell. Tape ends and the days that followed. Strange reports surfaced across the globe. Children born deaf began speaking languages no one recognized. Radio towers reactivated themselves, even those dismantled. Decades ago, old home videos played images that were never recorded, always involving a spiral drawn in chalk, in sand, in blood dot, and in Ellendale, where it all began. The ground cracked near the hollow church's foundation, not in a random pattern, but in the shape of a spiral. Clara's final message, scrawled on the wall of her sealed chamber, was released posthumously. Just for words, I only listened back. Some believe she was a victim, others think she was a prophet, but those who truly understand know she was a conduit. And now, the spiral isn't just seen, it's felt, in the back of your mind. When everything goes quiet, in the way your reflection lingers too long in the brief, high-pitched ring just before sleep, because the final truth isn't that something was let in, it's that it was always here, waiting, watching, and, above all, listening. So ask yourself, what have you heard lately that no one else seems to notice? Thank you, 4WATSHING, to the narrative nest. This story ends here, but the echoes, they never stop. Like, share, and subscribe before you forget what you heard.